Jackson wasn't just any coach. He was a mind reader, a mentor, a philosopher, and in some cases, a babysitter.
Great game. Michael Jordan came up with a good game.
He walked into a locker room filled with massive egos, rebellious personalities, and emotional explosions, and somehow he managed to make them into a winning machine. Phil Jackson isn't your stereotypical coach with a bad temper. He wasn't the loudest guy in the room, which is surprising for an NBA coach.
If you're going back and you're going to look back at all the things that have happened behind you, you're not going to have time to be ready for what's coming down the road at you. And that's the way it is when you're in this business. This is a warrior business. You got to be prepared every step. You just can't rest on your laurels because someone's coming down the road ready to knock you down and take your spot.
He didn't yell or throw chairs like Bobby Knight. He believed in balance and mindfulness and in keeping egos in check, not by suppressing them, but by embracing them. You could say he approached coaching like a monk approached life, with wisdom and action. He molded his players in their own essence instead of making them feel like they were wrong, and propelled them to victory despite their stubbornness and difficult personalities. And we all know that isn't an easy feat considering the ego of every NBA player.
When he's on the court, Dennis registers emotion.
He was a diplomat that was able to change the mood of any room he entered, and he was able to manipulate some of the most difficult personalities the NBA has ever seen into victory. Some of these big personalities included the legendary Michael Jordan, who was one of the players that was personally handled by Jackson. Before Phil Jackson arrived, Michael Jordan was already a superstar, but he was also a selfish player, a one-man army with a big ego. He carried the Chicago Bulls on his back, not because he had to, but because he didn't trust his teammate, never passed the ball, and wanted to do it all himself. Phil knew that had to change if he wanted results, so he implemented something that would be talked about for years. He introduced Jordan to the triangle offense, a system built on passing, spacing, and trust. Jordan hated it at first. He didn't want to give up control. But Jackson didn't just talk strategy. He got inside Jordan's mind. He knew in order to make it work, he had to think like him. So he gave him books on leadership because he understood that Jordan possessed the qualities of a leader. These qualities, however, were not refined yet. But Jackson was determined to shape him into one in the most subtle of ways. He challenged him to think beyond scoring and beyond himself in the most demure way in coaching history. A leader's job is to create an environment where everyone can succeed. At first, Jordan rejected it. He was a superstar that believed he had everything under control, but when Jackson asked him, "How many championships have you won by yourself?" Jordan knew the answer. 0. And that simple question was enough to catalyze his strong personality and channel his leadership mentality and translate into championship wins. Jordan quickly bought into the system, though it wasn't easy. He started to trust his teammates, deferring to Scottie Pippen and letting role players like John Paxson and Steve Kerr hit crucial shots. And the result? 6 championships, 2 three-peats, a dynasty. A feat that was only possible under Jackson's leadership. But if Jordan was tough to coach, he didn't compete to what came next. Wild card, King of Vegas, Dennis Rodman. If Jordan was the rigid, controlling adult, Dennis was the annoying teenager with ADH and a love for parties. He showed up in dresses, dyed his hair a different color every other week, and could disappear for days at a time. He was the problem child of the Chicago Bull. Most coaches would have kicked him out or benched him, but Phil had a better idea. He knew in order to get his wild child to behave, he had to let him think he was in control. Call it gentle parenting, if you will. One of the most famous moments in Bulls history happened in 1998, when Rodman asked for a vacation in the middle of the season. A ridiculous request, but Jackson didn't see it like that. In fact, he let him get his vacation. His logic was that he needed time to be himself. Of course, Jackson didn't expect him to come back on time for obvious reasons, but he let him go anyway, which surprised everyone, especially Jordan, who was against this. Just as expected, Rodman didn't come back on time. Jordan had to physically drag him out of a hotel room to get him back. But once he returned, Rodman played harder than ever. He led the league in rebounds. He looked down on the Hall of Famers on defense. He was a beast on the court, and this was because Phil understood the importance of building his player up and nurturing his energy towards the right direction instead of yelling. Phil Jackson didn't try to change Rodman. He simply understood that chaos was part of his process, and instead of putting out the flame, he fanned it. And boy, did it work. Shaq and Kobe. The Bulls dynasty was legendary, but when Jackson joined the Lakers, he faced a new challenge. Two superstars who kind of hated each other. Shaquille O'Neal was the most dominant big man in the league. Kobe Bryant was young, hungry phenom who wanted to prove he was better than MJ. The problem? They couldn't stand each other. Shaq thought Kobe was selfish. Kobe thought Shaquille was lazy. They argued. They fought. They nearly destroyed the team from within. Phil Jackson didn't force them to be friends like some soap opera drama. Instead, he gave them books. Yes, books. He assigned Shaq The Art of War and Kobe The Way of the Samurai. He made them meditate. He compared their rivalry to ancient warrior culture. At first, it seemed ridiculous. There was no way a couple of books could help. But to their surprise, it did. It forced them to see the bigger picture. Phil made it clear. You don't have to like each other. You just have to win together. And they did win. 3 straight championships. Of course, their feud never fully disappeared, but under Jackson's leadership, it stayed contained long enough to build a dynasty. Ron Artest. It's the man who thanked his therapist. Ron Artest was another challenge. He was aggressive, unpredictable. A player so fiery, he once ran into the stands and started a brawl. When he joined the Lakers, people thought he'd be a disaster. But Phil Jackson thought differently. He saw something in him, a new project perhaps. He encouraged Artest to talk about mental health, something few athletes said at the time. He helped him stay focused, stay calm, and channel his energy into defense. When the Lakers won the 2010 championship, Ron Artest grabbed the microphone and thanked his therapist on live TV. That was Phil Jackson's influence, the legacy of a Zen master. Phil Jackson wasn't just a coach. He was a teacher, a psychologist, and a strategist. Some might even say a parent. He took some of the most difficult personalities in NBA history and turned them into beasts and winners. 22 championships, 2 dynasties. A legacy that will never be matched. His secret? An underrated art, empathy, emotional intelligence, and accommodation. He didn't force players to be something they weren't. He understood them. He guided them. His greatest tool was the triangle offense, a technique he used throughout his coaching career. He learned it from his assistant coach, Tex Winter, when he joined the Chicago Bulls and implemented this technique when no other head coach would listen to Winters or buy into his idea. Apart from his coaching career, Phil lived a simple life in his early years, and being born in a strong religious household where television wasn't allowed somehow propelled him to look elsewhere for entertainment, and that's how he discovered his love for basketball. He attended Ayleston High School in North Dakota, where he excelled in both basketball and baseball. His athletic talent earned him a scholarship to the University of North Dakota, where he played under future NBA coach Bill Fitch. At 6 feet 8 inches, Jackson was a standout, known for his defensive abilities and high basketball IQ. Though he lacked elite athleticism, he compensated for this in effort and intelligence. His strong defensive skills and work ethics led him to being drafted by the New York Knicks. Drafted by the New York Knicks in 1967, Jackson played as a defensive-minded forward. He won NBA championships in 1970 and 1973 with the Knicks before finishing his career with the New Jersey Nets. Despite not being a star player, Jackson developed a deep understanding of team dynamics fostered by Coach Red Holtzman and his emphasis on unselfish play. After retiring, Jackson began coaching in 1982 with the Albany Patroons in the Continental Basketball Association CBA, where he won a championship in 1984. He then spent time coaching in Puerto Rico before joining the Chicago Bulls as an assistant in 1987 under Doug Collins. Phil Jackson somehow ranked to the top, becoming one of the greatest coaches ever, molding players into champions with his excellent people skills. And in a league where talent is everywhere, that made all the difference. Some coaches scream, some draw up plays, but only Phil could take the craziest personalities in basketball and manipulate them into champions. He was a genius and a kind of parent to his players. That's why Phil Jackson is the greatest coach of all time.